Just over 6 weeks ago, on July the 10th, the Gillard Government announced a comprehensive plan for a clean energy future. And that plan comprises 4 key elements. Firstly, a carbon price mechanism that will create the incentive to cut pollution and invest in cleaner energy sources. Secondly, there's strong support for renewable energy, which, when coupled with the carbon price and our renewable energy target, will drive $20 billion worth of investment in renewable energy over just the next 8 years and $100 billion to the year 2050. Third, measures that will encourage improved energy efficiency with businesses and in households. And the fourth element of the plan contains substantial measures to promote the storage of carbon through improved agriculture and land management practices. Now, the package is the result of intensive policy development work by the government. Indeed, there's years of work behind this, when you consider that the initial concepts, indeed, for an emissions trading scheme were devised during the latter period of the Howard government and then developed in detail in the last parliamentary term. But immense amount of work has been done over the last 8 months, and one of the things that I'd like to acknowledge is the tremendous public policy work contributed by officers of my department, in particular, the Department of Climate Change and Energy Efficiency. But at this particular point, I thought it would be timely to review where the policy is up to, how it's tracking, and what the package will do for our economy. It's also timely, I think, to dispel some of the myths propagated by the policy-free zone, that is, the Conservative coalition at both the federal and state levels on this issue. The Clean Energy Future package rests on a set of interlocking propositions. Firstly, of course, the foundation for the Clean Energy Future package is the climate science. I won't deal with that today in detail, other than to refer those looking for an authoritative overview of the science to the publication titled The Critical Decade, Climate Science, Risks and Responses, that was released by the Climate Commission several months ago. That report reinforces that there is no doubt that the climate is changing, that we are already seeing the social, economic and environmental impacts of climate change, that human activities are triggering the changes we are witnessing, and that decisions that we make now to 2020 will determine the severity of climate change our children and grandchildren will experience. The second proposition concerns the advice to the government from the Climate Commission, as well as other scientific agencies and individual scientists, including those internationally, and it demands the tackling of climate change by cutting pollution in our own economy and by playing a responsible part internationally to deal with this issue. And the third proposition, to respond to the science by cutting carbon pollution in our own economy, we must put in place the most cost-effective measures to achieve the reforms that are necessary at the lowest cost to businesses and households. And this means that we need a market-based mechanism. The government's package is designed with this objective clearly in mind, to achieve the cuts in pollution at lowest cost to our economy. And in an emissions-intensive economy as ours is, that is an extremely important policy design objective. The key features of the package that we announced include briefly the following: a new 2050 emissions reduction target, representing Australia's fair share of global emissions reductions. A carbon pricing mechanism that is an emissions trading scheme, commencing with a 3-year fixed price period from the 1st of July next year, followed by a price set by the market and linkage of the emissions trading scheme to international carbon markets from the 1st of July 2015. Design of the mechanism to achieve emissions reductions of at least 5% in the year 2020 compared with year 2000 levels. A new climate change authority to advise government on pollution caps to achieve the emissions reduction targets. Assistance for households, of course, through tax cuts and increases in pensions and other benefits, including an important tax reform, essentially the trebling of the tax-free threshold, that will promote workforce participation, simplify the tax system, and mean that over 1 million people no longer have to submit a tax return. There's also a very carefully designed package to support jobs and competitiveness in the trade-exposed emissions-intensive sectors of the economy. There are large programs promoting innovation, investment and energy efficiency in manufacturing in particular. There's a $5.5 billion energy security fund to support the reliability of electricity supply and to encourage transformation of our electricity generation sector to lower emissions technologies and fuels. There's a $10 billion investment by the government proposed in a new clean energy finance corporation to support the commercialisation of renewable and low emissions technologies. And there's $1 billion allocated over the first 3 years of the scheme for land and biodiversity measures. Now, these are just some of the key features of the plan that was announced by the government on the 10th of July. There are, of course, many other elements to it. But it is a comprehensive and detailed package. It does respond to the science. It will cut pollution, and it will drive innovation and investment in clean energy, and it ensures that Australia will play its part internationally in tackling climate change at the lowest cost to our economy. A carbon price is an essential component of any credible plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions cost effectively. A carbon price gets to the heart of the issue. It makes activities that cause the problem more expensive and activities that address the problem less expensive. This is a conclusion, of course, shared by the OECD, the IMF, the World Bank, the Stern Review, the work undertaken for the Howard Government by Professor Peter Shergold, the Garnaut Review, the recent work of the Productivity Commission, and countless other credible economists. Carbon pricing works because it sends a clear signal across the economy. It creates an incentive to uncover the cheapest ways of reducing pollution. It allocates capital to improve efficiency and reduce emissions intensity. Over time, the most efficient, least polluting firms will have an advantage over less efficient, higher polluting firms. Pricing carbon will break the link between economic growth and emissions growth. But this process, particularly in an emissions-intensive economy such as ours, must be gradual. Treasury modelling, of course, concludes that the Australian economy will continue to prosper while cutting pollution, while making this important reform. Real gross national income per person is expected to increase from today's levels by around $9,000 per person to 2020 and more than $30,000 per person by 2050. That is, gross national income grows, real incomes per person, of course, grow. Employment is projected to grow strongly with a carbon price. Around 1.6 million jobs are projected to be created between now and 2020 and a further 4.4 million to 2050. The economy grows, gross national income grows, jobs grow. At the sectoral level, a carbon price will change the way we produce electricity. Over time, it will dramatically reduce our reliance on emissions-intensive coal-fired generation and increase our use of renewable energy, gas and other lower emissions technologies, but change will be gradual. Having run out of reasons to oppose a carbon price, some now argue, of course, that we should delay its implementation, particularly given the uncertainties in the international economy. And the key problem with a wait-and-see approach is that it delays reform that is inevitable and it increases the costs. Is there ever going to be a period where there are no near-term uncertainties or global risks, or where there are no longer-term structural pressures like environmental changes, the ageing of the population, technological change, or the pressures from the commodities boom? I doubt it. Not now is generally just code for not ever. Delay can also only add to uncertainty, and that's the last thing that we need at times like this. For companies to be able to get on and make long-term investment decisions, we need a credible, coherent, long-term plan to deal with this issue. And the government has designed a package that allows our economy to continue to prosper while carbon pollution is reduced. And this is especially important in areas like the energy sector, where investors know a carbon price is coming. They need it implemented so that they will have clarity about investment in assets with lives of 30, 40 or 50 years. And until this issue is resolved, these investments will largely remain stalled. Now, given the importance of climate change, the public debate is disappointing to say the least. It has featured some of the most absurd, inane, puerile and self-serving tripe that I can remember in public policy debate. The political nonsense distracts from the fact that, since the policy was released, neither the opposition nor anyone else has successfully challenged the policy substance. Independent commentators and experts have judged the package variously as sound, well developed, clearly expressed and practicable. It is equitable, it's progressive, it's evidence-based, it's coherent and it's comprehensive. And so are the bills that I will introduce into the Parliament in mid-September. Bills that we intend to be passed by both Houses of Parliament before Christmas. Tony Abbott's contribution to the climate change debate since he usurped the leadership of the Liberal Party has been single-focused. It's been to engender fear, to dumb down politics and to frighten people through deceit, misrepresentation and distortion. He's also, of course, reversed his position numerous times, for example, saying that he's never been in favour of a carbon tax or an emissions trading scheme, despite clearly, on the record, supporting both positions in the past. He's questioned the point of the 5% emissions reduction target, when that is in fact his own policy as well. He said one thing to one audience regarding the climate science and then the opposite to a different audience. He said that a tonne of carbon dioxide is in fact weightless. He's also said we need to prevent fraud, of course, and then attacked the government for creating a clean energy regulator with the powers to protect the integrity of the scheme. He's been aided and abetted by particular shock jocks, one of whom, when taken to task over his misrepresentation, retorted that he's an entertainer, not a journalist, and so shouldn't be held to journalistic standards. Media Watch, in fact, highlighted two instances where Alan Jones told his listeners that the Prime Minister should be put in a chaff bag and thrown out to sea. I don't consider that entertaining at all, and nor should anyone else. In the charged environment in which this debate is being conducted, it is in fact inflammatory. Among the many myths that Mr Abbott has been propagating, the most egregious have been his forecast of the death of the coal industry, his fear-mongering amongst small business people, and his xenophobic attacks on international carbon trading. Firstly, I'll just deal with the coal industry. Mr Abbott has told workers, and I quote, "A carbon tax ultimately means death to the coal industry." Now, it is disreputable, and it particularly offends me with my background representing workers. It is disreputable to go around scaring people with unfounded claims about losing their jobs. The fact is that in the first year of the carbon price, the average carbon liability per tonne of coal is only $1.90. Now, the coal industry in this country has a sound future and the government supports its future. Treasury modelling shows the Australian coal sector more than doubling its output by 2050 with a carbon price in place. Now, this is supported by investment decisions coal companies are taking. We have seen 4 decisions since the carbon price announcement that demonstrate the long-term viability of the coal industry and the confidence that the players in that industry have in it. They include Peabody's $4.7 billion offer for Macarthur Coal, Rio Tinto and Mitsubishi's proposed buyout of Coal and Alloyed in my own region of the Hunter for $1.49 billion. Vale's approval last week of a US $875 million investment at Eagle Downs, and the revelation of plans by Indian energy company, Adani Enterprises, for up to $10 billion worth of investment in a vertically integrated coal supply chain. And when Vale announced its decision last week, its global coal director said the following: "The board's approval was indicative of Vale's ongoing commitment to Australia and to its vision to significantly increase production in Australia." On the future of the coal industry, Tony Abbott has no credibility whatsoever. Workers who've got concern for their job security as a result of Tony Abbott's fear-mongering will develop contempt for him for the deceit that he is engaged in. On small businesses, almost every day Mr Abbott, of course, has visited a small business, arguing that the carbon price will place them in jeopardy, effectively destroying their business. And again, his message, of course, has been one of fear. The fact is that the cost to small business is modest and can generally be passed through. The Council of Small Business of Australia has provided the government with a breakdown of the costs of a typical small retail business operating in a suburban shopping centre. The impact of a carbon price on the total costs of the retailer provided by COSBOA is 0.66%. This means that the business can recover the cost through an increase in prices of 0.66%. So, for example, a $10 packet of mince meat would increase in price by around 6.6 cents, or a $60 pair of jeans would go up in price by less than 40 cents. In some other businesses that we've spoken with, the electricity cost increase is in fact less, and that's the main cost that would be affected by the introduction of a carbon price. Sometimes that's only 0.1 or 0.2% increase in costs for the business. But the fundamental point is that the cost is modest and that it can be passed on to customers, as small businesses are typically not trade exposed. A dry cleaner isn't directly competing against dry cleaners in China. Drivers can't get their cars serviced in India. Small businesses face cost increases regularly, whether it's a rise in the minimum wage or increases in electricity prices, and we've seen 40% rises over the last several years. Because the small business down the road faces the same costs, costs can generally be passed through to customers. And of course, the government is assisting the customers. 9 out of 10 households will get assistance. Almost 6 million households will get assistance that meets or exceeds their expected average price impact, and over 4 million households, almost half of all households, will get assistance that provides a 20% buffer over and above their expected average price impact. Now, I appreciate the pressures that are on small businesses in this country, but some facts are important to inject into this debate. Perhaps Mr Abbott's most economically irresponsible attack, though, is on the linking of our carbon price mechanism with credible overseas carbon markets, allowing Australian businesses to purchase international offsets to meet some of their carbon price obligations. Climate change is global, and any solution to climate change will involve coordination and cooperation with the international community. There's only one atmosphere, and a reduction in pollution anywhere benefits all. That's why credible, internationally linked emissions trading schemes are important, particularly, again, for emissions-intensive economies such as ours. They allow pollution to be cut at the lowest cost wherever it can be achieved. Now, the former Prime Minister, John Howard, understood this well. In the emissions trading policy that he took to the 2007 election, it was clearly stated, "The Australian scheme will be designed to maximise the prospect of linkages with other schemes and with policy-based arrangements such as offsets, where offshore emissions-reducing activities could be counted by Australian firms in determining their net emissions." Mr Howard agrees with this government's policy, and I don't recall Mr Abbott criticising that when it was released. And to understand the effect of the carbon price, we must measure how much carbon pollution it will cut against the business as usual emissions projections. Without a carbon price, Australia's emissions are projected to be over 1,000 million tonnes in the year 2050. With a carbon price, we will reduce our net emissions by 80% below 2000 levels, with the Treasury modelling, showing that 463 million tonnes will be abated within Australia in 2050 and 434 million tonnes offset through international permits. Through international linking of emissions trading schemes, we can also establish a common carbon price between our economy and our trading partners, thereby ensuring that carbon pricing does not disadvantage our industries. It also provides opportunities for farmers and land managers that store carbon and seek to sell these credits on international markets. Now, the opposition's prohibition on trading carbon permits with other countries is economic xenophobia. It sends the signal that it's somehow dubious to trade with foreigners. It's typical dog whistle politics, trashing the commitment that's existed for many years on both sides of politics to economic liberalisation and open trade. It is, in effect, a white carbon policy designed to harvest some more votes, no matter what the cost. It would also have very serious economic consequences. It's reckless. An emissions trading scheme to achieve just the 5% reduction target through domestic-only measures would result in a carbon price at least double the carbon price under the scheme the government has announced. And keep in mind that costing reflects an emissions trading scheme which is significantly more efficient than the opposition's subsidies for polluters policy. In this optimistic scenario, the subsidies for polluters policy will cost the budget $48 billion to 2020, almost 5 times the stated cost of the Coalition's policy. And this would mean that the average Australian household will have to pay an extra $1,300 in taxes. On both economic and environmental grounds, the government's Clean Energy Future package stands head and shoulders above the alternative. The alternative is a policy that will cost, as I've said, at a minimum $48 billion to 2020, but will not change how economic decisions are made and will do nothing beyond 2020 to reduce our pollution. That is why not one reputable economist supports Tony Abbott's policy. Now, the Federal Coalition's attacks on the Clean Energy Future package have been aided and abetted, of course, by the New South Wales, Victorian and Western Australian governments in recent weeks, which have put narrow political interests ahead of the long-term economic interests of their states. Now, take, for example, the analysis presented by the Government of New South Wales, which is the result of both commissioned work by Frontier Economics and New South Wales Government Analysis. The New South Wales Premier has used convenient assumptions to arrive, of course, at convenient political conclusions. For example, Frontier Economics, when assessing the electricity price impact on households, assume a pass-through rate of 1.5 to 1.6 tonnes of carbon pollution per megawatt hour. This results in a price impact of $40 to $60 per tonne of CO2 produced in generating electricity, from a carbon price of just $23 per tonne. This is quite absurd, as the carbon intensity of electricity generation nationally is under 0.9 tonnes of carbon pollution per megawatt hour, and the Federal Treasury modelling projects a wholesale electricity price increase of $18 per megawatt hour. All that the New South Wales proposition suggests is that they intend to price gouge and charge 150 or 160% of the actual cost of the carbon price. It also prompts questions about how such an assumption can be consistent with another claim made by the New South Wales Government, namely that their electricity generators will suffer huge asset value losses as a result of carbon pricing. It's hard to see how huge asset value losses are consistent with the generators passing on more than the carbon cost to their customers, in fact making a profit along the way. That would enhance their asset value. The reliance on contradictory assumptions shows the New South Wales modelling to be what it is, a political exercise, and the so-called modelling by the Victorian and Western Australian governments doesn't appear any better. In contrast, today the Queensland Treasury analysis of a carbon price is a refreshing change from what we've heard from the other states to date. The Queensland Treasury do not attempt to phrase their analysis in a biased negative way and conclude the following: that the introduction of a carbon price is estimated to have a relatively small economic impact for Queensland over the next decade, and one can just consider for a moment the $14 billion commitment of an investment in the LNG project in Queensland that was announced since July the 10th as an expression of confidence in the future of the Queensland economy in light of carbon pricing. In conclusion, the Gillard Government's climate change policy sets in train a fundamental economic transformation that will increase prosperity while it reduces carbon pollution. It will boost employment. It will boost investment. It will encourage innovation and technological development. It will deliver critical environmental outcomes by putting in place sustained reductions in greenhouse gases. And it will deliver a clean energy legacy to our children and their children. This is good policy, it is equitable, it is timely, it's comprehensive, and it will be effective. And while the politics of the moment reflect nothing more than the negativity and small-mindedness of senior coalition members, the government, I assure you, intends to drive its clean energy future policy through to legislation, through the Parliament, and it will become law, and it will commence from the 1st of July next year, and it will be to the betterment of our economy, our environment and our society, and I commend it to you. Thank you.